I'm not used to speaking with a microphone, so if something goes wrong, someone should start waving their arms so I can correct it. Many thanks to Rolf Slupsema for suggesting to me that I talk with you all, and to Stell and to Cindy for setting things up. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and then it was made even better when I found out that my neighbor of the last 12 years, Dale Gordon, is a member of your congregation as well. She's not here today, but it turns out that there are a lot of you all over the place. So, why am I here? As you've heard, I teach at Georgia State. I teach the existentialism course at Georgia State. I started teaching there right out of graduate school in 2006. When I got there, the existentialism course was already on the books, thanks to your own Linda Bell, who was... Yeah. Hey, Linda. And I was assigned to teach it for spring semester 2007. Prior to prepping for that semester's course, I had really no firsthand exposure to existentialism at all, actually. Zero exposure. Partly that was because I didn't major in philosophy. I caught the philosophy fever very late in college, thanks to a particularly charming and demanding professor of mine. And then I just went straight to grad school without having done much of it as an undergrad. Which was interesting. And then partly it was because, and this is a bigger point, and I'm sure that Linda will, well, I imagine Linda will confirm this, that even among professors with some pretty out there ideas in like French and German modern philosophy, and so definitely among the grad students who are trying to be like those professors, existentialism is frequently taken to be a little bit embarrassing. If you naively ask most philosophy professors about it, they'll tell you a kind of range of things, that it's too blunt, maybe, that it's too simple, maybe, or that it, is really simple but twists itself around in circles, trying to look less simple, or that it ultimately ends up in relativism or something like that. They have a lot of complaints about it. This is true even though they'll admit to you that one of the reasons they became philosophy professors is that they took an existentialism course when they were undergraduates and got excited about it. But then they grew up, is the sort of thing they'll tell you. And of course, all that's true about some existentialists, and it's true about, all of them some of the time, right? Everybody oversimplifies, right? They're humans. But then that means it's also true about every other philosophy, too, since all of those are also the work of humans. But there's something else about existentialism that separates it from almost every other philosophy, and that's that it's popular. And that it's even a part of popular culture. It's widely known. There are existentialist novels and movies and songs and plays, churches, and even a kind of, associated style, right? Black berets, filterless Gauloise, things like that. And everyone has heard of at least someone going through an existential crisis. So, like a lot of our fellow academics, philosophers are caught between conflicting professional desires. One of them is that they want to be aloof and serious and expert and erudite. And the other is that they want to be liked and influential and widely read and recognized and popular. And unlike pretty much all the rest of the philosophers, at least in the last few centuries, the existentialists from Kierkegaard in the 1840s to Sartre and Beauvoir in the 1940s and beyond, the existentialists actually pulled this off. They actually managed to be both. And so I think naturally, like, they were both, rigorous and, technical in some sort of sense, but also popular. They got out into the world and made themselves understood. And I think that there's a little bit of envy or resentment toward existentialism in professional philosophy because of this, right? They managed to have it all, and that just doesn't seem fair. Now, in 2006, I myself was firmly in the camp of finding existentialism mildly embarrassing to my self-concept as a philosopher, because I had taken all this thinking on board. But then, miracle of miracles, I got a tenure-track job. And since I was now the European philosophy guy, I was scheduled to teach existentialism. They didn't really ask. So I read up, and I borrowed some syllabuses, and I cooked up a course. And as the first day of classes approached, I took a peek at the class roster, and there was something that kind of stood out about it to me compared to the class rosters from the previous semester, and this has stayed true for, 19 years. And that's that even though it's a 300-level course, that means it's a course for majors. It's mostly for philosophy majors. There were a lot of non-majors in the course. I couldn't really understand why. I hadn't had all these thoughts about existentialism yet. So on the first day of class, I asked everybody, why are you here? Why did you enroll in this class? And that solved the mystery, of course. They enrolled because they had actually heard of existentialism before. And that, made them interested in it. We don't teach philosophy in the high schools, so a lot of students come in and they kind of have no idea what we're doing, except they've heard of existentialism, and so that's something they like to take. Now, they've heard of it, but this doesn't mean that they've read it or that they know really anything about it. They've heard of it, but they tend to arrive with a lot of misconceptions about it. For instance, that all existentialists are atheists, or that somehow it essentially involves, chain smoking and drinking a lot of coffee. And to be honest, despite my best efforts, every semester, at least some of them finish the course with some new misconceptions. For instance, that existentialism is just nihilism, or just a more stylish form of good old American individualism. Maybe it's something that tells them their parents are full of it, and they should seek and actualize their true inner selves. Society and other humans be damned, in a kind of blunt way, right? Some of them come in wanting it to be nihilistic and so forth, and are kind of confused when we spend the first month or so talking about a devout Danish Lutheran, Kierkegaard. Others find what we read in the course much more disconcerting than anything they were prepared for. In fact, I once had a student announce to the class on the last day that her therapist was very glad the course was ending because it was impeding her progress. I was both proud and sorry at that time. Anyway, sometimes after 15 weeks of trying to teach them about it, I get on my own case when I notice that they have not only not gotten rid of all of their old misunderstandings, maybe, but they've also gotten some new ones. But when I'm being fair to myself, I recognize that although many of the authors and thinkers labeled existentialists display a lot of variation in their views, they all do have one feature, and that is that they all complain bitterly about how everybody misunderstands them. And so this is, why is this true? Well, first of all, philosophers like to do that generally, but also existentialism, it, as a way of thinking, kind of teeters on the brink of incomprehensibility on purpose a lot of the time. When Kierkegaard tells us that he himself can't, that no one can explain what's involved in taking this thing he calls a leap into faith, right? He nonetheless insists we should take it, but that he can't really explain what he means, right? That it's not the sort of thing that can be explained. It's the sort of thing you just have to do, right? That's not... If he tells you he doesn't understand it, it's hard to believe that you're going to understand it. Or when Sartre tells us that we are, as he says, condemned to freedom, right? So in other words, although existentialism had a lot of success in getting itself out into the general culture, at least as a word, it's always been somehow both popular and misunderstood. And it's always presented itself as both popular in the sense that it's for everyone, and misunderstood in the sense that it's somehow inherently beyond or somehow outside or under or something like that, our normal tools for thinking and our normal way of thinking. So, the life of a teacher of existentialism turns out to be a life of teaching something that in some sense can't be understood to groups of students who are generally very enthusiastic about it, but who also have no previous classes on philosophy and probably aren't going to take any further classes in philosophy. And, you know, that's the situation. That's life with Sartre from my side. Now, sometimes this can be distressing and, maybe even despair-inducing. And in those moments of distress, here's what I do. I look to one of the later items on my syllabus, which is Sartre's essay, Existentialism is a Humanism. Sometimes this is published under the title Existentialism and Humanism. Because in this essay, Sartre actually deals with that exact same problem. He deals with this problem directly. The popularity and incomprehensibility of existentialism. So I say it's an essay. What it really is a kind of lightly edited, improvised talk that he gave, that he then allowed to be published. It was a talk he gave to a discussion group in Paris in the aftermath of World War II. The group was grappling with the question of how French society would be organized after the war. The previous 150 years of French history had been a pretty bumpy ride, and there was no obvious prior system for them to go back to, right? There wasn't some prior government that had really worked very well that they could say, well, now that we won, we're going to go back to that. Were they going to be communists? Were they going to be de Gaullists, like secular Republicans? Right? Were they going to be a Catholic state? They didn't know. And there was a lot of debate about it, and existentialism was a big deal in France at the time, and Sartre was invited by the group to explain what contribution existentialism could make to how they should organize, how they should live together after the horrors of the war. Now, this invitation itself was kind of a misunderstanding of Sartre's own existentialism. Like, to even invite him to come do this displays a certain, misunderstanding, right? Like, what on earth could the guy who wrote No Exit, right? No Exit's most famous line is, hell is other people, right? Like, why is this the guy you're asking about how to arrange society, right? In his more technical moments, he says things like, man makes himself a non-being so that there might be being. That does not sound immediately helpful. In Nausea, he spends a lot of time attacking this thing he calls humanism. So it's not easy to tell how this could contribute to, a productive discussion about the future of society. But Sartre, quite characteristically, was totally blithely undeterred by all of this, right? He shows up and he dives right in, announcing that everyone has misunderstood existentialism. That's his opening in the essay. None of you have any idea what I'm talking about. This is how he starts, basically. Right? He announces that everyone, the Marxists, the Catholics, the secular humanists, they've all gotten it wrong and they have no idea what existentialism is about. And that's understandable, he says, because it's a highly technical kind of philosophy and it's really only for the experts. But luckily, Sartre, is there and is willing to explain it to them in straightforward terms. Right, so consider, he says, one of the usual accusations made against existentialism, when existentialism rejects the idea that we should or even can live our lives anchored in some kind of unchanging eternal value. Right? According to this accusation, existentialism is basically opposed to, the essence of human life. It's opposed to everything that makes life living. This is something that the Catholics in particular were accusing existentialism of. So according to this accusation, when existentialism insists on the individual's active and free responsibility to give her own life, the lives of others, etc., whatever meaning it's going to have, when existentialism says that there's no meaning available other than the one the individual chooses or makes for herself, existentialism, says this accusation, drains life of all genuine and substantive meaning. So Sartre's reply to this accusation is that far from being antagonistic to life, life's pleasures and its rich meaningfulness, it is existentialism and existentialism alone that he says first makes human life possible. His reply is, existentialism is the thing that makes human life possible. So when I'm thinking to myself that the life of an existentialism professor is in some basic way doomed to frustration and failure, I like to remind myself that according to Sartre anyway, one clear and straightforward thing we can say about existentialism is that it is the philosophy that first makes human life possible. The problem with this strategy of trying to make the life of an existentialism teacher a little more bearable is that this is a very bizarre thing to say. What could Sartre possibly have had in mind when he said this? Perhaps he was not thinking very clearly and didn't really mean it. In fact, Sartre himself later regretted allowing this improvised speech to be published. Right? I mean, he published it in his own journal, so he can't really regret it that much, but he did try to retract parts of it a little bit sometimes, right? Some of the things he said in the lecture later came back to haunt him, particularly when he had developed a more kind of Marxist version of existentialism. And we've all been there, right? I mean, not maybe, but if you read it, you can tell quite surely, actually, he got worked up, maybe, and a little bit, out over the ends of his skis. So maybe we shouldn't hold him quite so strictly to his word. After all, Sartre's no fool. He knows that existentialism, as a distinct philosophical position, begins at the very earliest in some passages in Rousseau and doesn't really get going until Kierkegaard, so the 1840s. And human life, of course, had been a going concern for quite some time before then. We can't reasonably expect Sartre to be denying any of that. Right? When he says existentialism first makes human life possible, he's also aware that existentialist thinking is not some sort of biological precondition for like Homo sapiens, right? So maybe he didn't really mean it. But on the other hand, he's not a fool, and that means that he deserves to be taken at his word. Maybe especially when that word escapes him in an unguarded moment. And maybe that's the better way to think about this claim. That in the context of talking to this discussion group, he allowed himself to be a little bit more straightforward than he is in something like Being in Nothingness, which is, not that straightforward a lot of the time. But if that's true, then we're back to the question of what he could possibly mean when he says that existentialism first makes human life possible. Clearly, he attributes to something like groundbreaking and new in and for human life to the advent of existentialist thinking. And that something new isn't just some kind of like bonus feature for life. It isn't just something optional but nice, some refinement of advanced human culture like, flush toilets or pickleball. The new thing that existentialism offers isn't a new thing for human life, but is supposed to be some sort of renewal of human life itself. A new way of the old familiar human life, such that now human life could be what it should have been, or what it was trying to be all along, which means this renewed life was there all along, but it just wasn't renewed yet. It wasn't yet as it should have been. So although it deals with the oldest philosophical problem, how should I live? Sartre's existentialism is indeed new. It hadn't been thought before. It wasn't a variation on Plato or Aristotle or St. Thomas or Descartes or idealism, rationalism, empiricism, whatever, right? As the vast majority of allegedly new philosophies tend to be. They tend to be, reworkings of something we've seen before. Of course, there are earlier existentialisms, but Sartre's trying to kind of purify these and strip out the parts of them that are remnants from other ways of thinking. And to the extent that Sartre's version is the fully realized version of existentialism, it does count as new, and it counts as a possible first way of making human life possible. So what's the proposal? What is the proposal through which existentialism will, according to Sartre, finally make genuinely human life? Not what we've been doing all along, but human life in a new mode that finally releases the potential of life that's been there all along. What's the proposal that's supposed to make that possible? Well, what existentialism proposes, he says, is that we, as humans, live through action. Action in this world, action in our shared and individual worlds. To live is to act, and when we act, we have to act according to some sort of principle or rule, because we can't understand what we've done in our action without understanding it, through some sort of principle or rule. Right? When I bake a cake, I act in a way that I understand meets the criteria for cake baking. Right? Otherwise, I don't know what I'm doing. Right? To say I'm baking a cake is to say, yeah, there's something that counts and something that doesn't count, and the thing I'm doing counts. It's baking a cake. Right? When I listen to my child's complaint, right, I act in such a way that I'm, trying to do this thing that I think of as careful listening. That means I'm acting according to a rule in some sense of careful listening. So whatever action I undertake, I do it in light of some idea of what counts as that kind of action. Now, up to this point, we're still not really at the existentialism part of existentialism. A lot of people agree about that earlier bit. The existentialism part comes in two steps. The first is that insofar as I'm the one who's alive through the actions I take, I and only I am the one who acted. And so I and only I am fully and completely responsible for having acted as I did. And that means I'm the one who adopted and endorsed the rule or the principle I was using when I acted. Right? I'm the one who thought this is how you do it, and then I'm the one who said, I'm going to do it. It's never true to say, I did it because that's how I was raised, or that's just the kind of person I am. Right? To say those things is actually to claim, according to Sartre, that I didn't do it at all. Right? That how I was raised did it. Right? Or that, the kind of person I am did it. But how I was raised doesn't do anything. The kind of person I am doesn't do anything. I do it. So the second step, that's the first step. The second step is that in our acting, we have to be aware that we never have a guarantee that our action will succeed or that our principle of action, our rule, is justified, either in general or in our application of it. To have that kind of guarantee or justification in the sense of being able to point to a reason outside ourselves that would get us off the hook if something goes wrong or if we left something out. Right? To do any of that would be to claim that life is not a matter of action for which I'm responsible, but a matter of eternal laws or values or meanings that are not mine, not ours, because in some sense kind of outside the realm of messy, fallible human life. To live within the realm of human life is to act with awareness, dim or bright, admitted or denied, but awareness nonetheless, that all the grounds for our actions are in us, within each of us. So, I did it out of patriotism. Very well, but you were the one who made patriotism into the principle of your action and decided that what you did would count as patriotic. No one else could ever do that for you except you. Or, I did it because it seemed like the right thing to do. No doubt it did. And you are the one for whom it seemed that way. More precisely, you took things that way. You took the world in such a way that that taking chose your action for you. In other words, you chose it. I did it to liberate him. An excellent reason, if there's any such reason. But to take liberation as a worthy goal, you did that too. To understand doing precisely the things you did, A, B, and C, as contributing to his liberation, and so to do A, B, and C, you did that. Every bit of that is you, and might not have been other than the awareness, the responsibility. There is nothing about the human that demands taking patriotism or liberation or what seemed at the moment the right thing to do as its principle. Others have other principles. They make other choices. They are also living human lives. The humanity of the life, then, does not consist in the actions chosen, but in the awareness of choosing the action, the awareness of the fact that the action is chosen, and the embrace of that awareness. So this is the new claim, the claim to new understanding of the old problem of living. There's no essence to which the human may appeal. She exists such that she's on her own, must act here and now, doesn't choose. Sartre calls this facticity. But of which she is the interpreter, and beyond which her mental gaze is always directed. We're always looking, in some sense, to when we do something, to alter the way things are. So we accept the way things are, we're stuck with the way things are, but we also act to change them. We have to start with something we didn't make the way it is, and then we try to make it. So, the human is without essence, but lives by making an essence for itself, by adopting rules for itself, principles, while knowing all along that that essence is not, in fact, its essence, but something it made for itself. I was raised to be a patriot. That explains nothing. Many so raised are not patriots. Many raised otherwise are patriots. Or better, no one is a patriot. Each makes himself one, or not one, each time. Thus, human life is first possible thanks to existentialism, because existentialism first gets it right about what the human is. The human exists or acts, and thus gets it right. Existentialism does, about how to live humanly. Do I have a couple more minutes, or am I going too long?
Yeah, wrap it up.
I'm wrapping. Okay, so fine. Look, I'm at the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. In a certain sense, none of this is news to you. No. But now consider every philosophy, every religion, every anthropology, every sociology, every neuroscience, etc., all of it makes this same kind of claim. We have finally figured it out, and so we have finally made the true actualization of humanity possible. Is Sartre's claim just another one of these claims? I don't think so. I think the content of the existentialist claim makes it different in kind. The usual sort of claim that this or that school makes about the essence of humanity includes, whether they say this out loud or not, the further claim that there's nothing more to say, that they figured it out and we're done. Right? The human is a sinner, and that's the end of the story. The human is a complicated great ape, that's the end of the story. The human is a rational pursuer of his economic benefit, and that's the end of the story. The new claim of the usual sort means to rule out any other new claims. But Sartre's new claim is not like this. Sartre's claim isn't just new, it's a claim about newness. It's a claim about renewal. Existentialism first makes human life possible, he says. It makes it possible in a way that no other philosophical proposal ever has. Existentialism doesn't make a new claim, but it makes a claim about newness, the newness of human life, the role of renewal in human life. What Sartre tells us is that I must in the sense that I do, and the only question is whether I'm going to admit this to myself or not. I must renew myself in my humanity every time I act. I must renew myself as self-conscious, as responsible, and therefore as humble. The fantasy of controlling the outcome of my action, along with the fantasy of shifting responsibility outside of myself onto something else, a tradition, a value, all of that is gone. No matter how clever my calculation of the world is, I can't shift the responsibility somewhere else. For not only might the world and people turn out to be different than I think they are, I might turn out to be different. In fact, I have to turn out to be different. For me to be the same later as I was now is for me to make myself the same again later. But that means that when I do it later, I'm not the same, because I'm doing it later. All right? Kierkegaard likes to call this living out on the deep. It's a life lived not in idealistic insistence or nihilistic revolt or reactionary resentment or stoical retreat, but in a clear-eyed humility that does not inhibit but excites the drive to act according to one's best lights, knowing we're constantly tempted to hide from those lights rather than admit that we live in the risk that they may be false. But that's a risk we take anyway, a risk we can't avoid. We all live out on the deep. That's human life, the life existentialism first makes possible.
Thank you, Dr. Rand. I'd like you to extend an invitation to your students to come check out a philosophically based community. You can take like the extra programs, and we don't believe we have the answers, but we like asking the questions.